This video is a series of clips from videos I have watched concerning topics in our era. They do tie in with the world of finance, either explicitly or implicitly. There is commentary before and after each clip to analyze what has been said and how that relates to the statutory limit on public debt. Note, this video is 7 of 8 in the series, so to have complete context, please watch the first 6 videos in this series. The video series stem from an assessment of the letters the U.S. Treasury Secretaries have been sending to Congress for the past 15 years. The URL where these letters can be found is listed there. This first clip is from Joe Brown of Heresy Financial giving information on the Federal Reserve.
The Federal Reserve is number 1, the most powerful economic decision maker in the world. Number 2 is not a company. Number 3 is not a federal agency either. And number 4 is not accountable to either shareholders or to voters. It leaves the inner workings of the Federal Reserve shrouded in mystery and suspicion.
Stepping back, Congress, with their ability to change the statutory limit on public debt, seems like a very important decision maker in the process. If Congress set the statutory limit on public debt to $1 trillion, the Federal Reserve would be contained within that parameter. This next video is Tucker Carlson with Sean Ryan. Pay attention to what Tucker says about Janet Yellen.
Almost to a person, the least productive people in the society. People who loan money at interest. Really? I mean, I guess there's a role for finance, in a society. But tell me how people who loan money for a living should be, the most revered and the most highly rewarded. No, they probably shouldn't be, actually. The people who make things, who innovate in a true sense, who actually improve human life, people who say profound things, create beautiful things, they should be rewarded. So it's all the truth is the people in charge are the least impressive. They're the least important. If they went away tomorrow, if Susan Rice and Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, is like a freaking moron and a bad person. If she went away tomorrow, would that be bad or it wouldn't have any difference. She's never done anything. And so that class of people, which is disproportionately benefited from our system, has a lot to lose.
Janet Yellen, as the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, sits right at the crossroads, asking Congress to increase the statutory limit of public debt and making soft threats to Congress of the consequences if they do not. Janet Yellen is not an unmoored moron. She is part of something entirely despicable and should not be dismissed as harmless, even if she appears without her wits. This next clip comes from El Salvador President Nayib Bukele's address to CPAC. Focus on what President Bukele says about how the U.S. acquires money.
Now, you would think that's it, as it wasn't enough, right? But unfortunately, there's more. There are other symptoms that are even more difficult to diagnose. For instance, the financial situation of the United States. When I talk to my conservative friends right here, they always tell me that the problem is high taxes, but they're wrong. Of course, high taxes are extremely high here in the United States. I give you that. You're right in that. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is not the high taxes themselves, but the fact that they are not even really funding the government. Not even those high taxes, higher than a lot of places in the world, not even those taxes are really funding the government. So who's financing the government? Government is financed by treasury bonds, paper. And who buys the treasury bonds? Mostly the Fed. And how does the Fed buy them? By printing money. But what backing does the Fed have for that money being printed? The Treasury bonds themselves. So basically, you finance the government by printing money out of thin air. Someone could ask, well, so if the government can print the limited amounts of money out of thin air, why do they collect taxes? I mean, in theory, it would make sense, right? If they can print unlimited amounts of money, why would they need taxes for? The answer is simple, but it's very shocking. The real problem is that you pay high taxes only to uphold the illusion that you are funding the government, which you are not. It's shocking, but it's true. The government is funded by money printing, paper backed with paper, a bubble that will inevitably burst. The situation is even worse than it seems, because if most Americans and the rest of the world were to become aware of this farce, confidence in your currency would be lost, the dollar would fall, and the Western civilization with it.
This is an interesting path of acquiring knowledge. In April 2024, I read the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. I then started to finish reading In the Fed by Ron Paul. While doing that, I saw this video with President Bukele of El Salvador at CPAC and agreed with him. I finished In the Fed and realized the statutory limit on public debt did not have a place of importance in that work. I then found all these PDFs the Treasury of Secretary has been sending to Congress and realized that was the restraint being impugned. So, President Bukele's omissions were spot on, but there is a missing limit that is being abused that is important, and therefore dangerous to ignore than just printing money. And that is the statutory limit on public debt. Without that first being increased, seemingly whenever the debt has been reached, then no Treasury bonds could be issued to acquire Federal Reserve notes. The statutory limit on public debt conserves the integrity of U.S. Treasury bonds and saves us from the nihilistic inflation of the money supply by the influx of Federal Reserve notes. This next video has Colonel Douglas Macgregor giving an assessment on the USA's foreign policy.
There are two things at work here. One is obviously the domestic angle, essentially transferring cash from the government to the supporters of the people, the donors to the campaigns of the people that voted for the legislation. Effectively standing up and waving the Ukrainian flag as a signal that I got your message, received your re-election campaign contribution, much appreciated. That's about it. As far as Ukraine is concerned, whatever shows up to Ukraine, as Ambassador Burns and the CIA pointed out some time ago, most of it will disappear into bank accounts around the world for Mr. Zelensky and his little band of men who have been robbing the place blind since they came into power. In the United States, it's a matter of what do we do next? We don't seem to think that there are either limits to our interests or to our resources. And that's untrue. We're exhausting our resources. Everyone inside the military understands that. The Defense Department knows it. We don't have much left to fight with at this stage. If we have to go to war, we're in a lot of trouble. So now we've created a second front in the Middle East that was never really necessary. And apparently that's not even enough. They'd like to have a third front in Asia, which is utterly preposterous. And we have no interest in either area to broaden or expand a war. So this is the problem. No sense of limits to our resources and no sense of limits to our interests.
I'd say that is an accurate assessment. And the most disturbing part is the language Colonel Douglas Macgregor uses is similar to what the U.S. Treasury Secretaries for the past 14 years have been telling Congress. We are continually bumping up on our limits, and our resources are being depleted. To support that, here is a warning from Clint Eastwood.
man's got to know his limitations.
Yes, that is what limitations are there for, to be respected. This next video is from Eric Prince talking to James O'Keefe.
With money. Congress can just appropriate a lot less money. Okay, Congress should be the thalidomide. It's a drug that was wrongfully administered, but it leads to a constriction of blood flow. You dry this city up. You will heal it by cutting off money to these massive overbloated federal agencies.
And a lot of people upset at Republican members of Congress. Is it a lack of will, a lack of balls? Do they have blackmail on people? What is the reason why
I think it's a combination of all. You have some marginal people that run for Congress. They don't have the moral courage to say, no, this ends now and we're going to cut this sucker down. And I'm sure, as you were able to show easily, it's very easy to compromise people in Washington.
You can just...
The Secretary of the Treasury is telling Congress in these letters specifically how to dry up the money supply in Washington, D.C. Simply have Congress vote no to deny increasing the statutory limit on public debt. This next video from Peter Zahan provides some global perspective.
So for us, a lot of the hard work has already been done. And while I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump by any measure, his renegotiation of NAFTA was a stroke of genius, and it got ahead of a lot of these issues. Because of that, North America as a unit looks pretty strong. And we're already seeing established linkages to other powers that might be useful. So we, for example, already have free trade deals with Colombia and Chile, which are, in my opinion, the two most dynamic South American economies. We already have a long-term agreement with both the Koreans and the Japanese. The Australians have a free trade deal with the United States, and we're in league with the Australians and the Japanese, really starting to become engaged with Southeast Asia, which is another part of the world where the demographics and the geography line up. So that kind of greater American co-prosperity sphere is about as good as it's going to get. I mean, you'll have to deal with the Americans. We tend to be a little twitchy sometimes, but we're twitchy in a different hemisphere for most of the partners.
Keep in mind that this global trade perspective is dependent on the U.S. Congress never voting no to increase the statutory limit on public debt. The U.S. Treasury Secretaries over the past 15 years have made clear that if the debt limit being increased is ever denied, the global markets will be in for some hard times. This next clip is from Tucker Carlson on the Sean Ryan Show.
I feel like we're being pushed into civil war.
Yes. Oh, of course.
Who do you think is pushing? I mean,
It's all on instinct.
with the weaponization of media, social media, bots. I mean, all this, all the lies in the division. I mean,
Of course.
who do you think is pushing it? Or are we already in it?
No, we're already in it. We're in definitely an undeclared conflict. It's a conflict, of course. If this were happening in another country, you would see this was, strife of some kind. I mean, who knows what to call it? But of course, I mean, it's the oldest. It is a strategy. I don't think it's ever fully articulated anywhere by anybody, but it's a conspiracy of like-minded instincts, as I noted at the beginning. People from the same class, the beneficiaries of our current system, understand what people all understand intuitively, which is divide and conquer. Like, fight amongst yourselves. Hey, white guy, it's the black guy's fault. Black guy, the white guy is impressing you, or whatever. Racism is America's biggest problem, right? Okay. Racism is not America's biggest problem. That's for sure. Or whatever, the tranny thing or the Israel protests. The biggest thing happening in America is a fight in a faraway country.
Yes, there is the liability to divide and conquer, and a civil war would be a form of conquering if the pieces could be reliably picked up afterwards. But more to the point, the U.S. Treasury Secretary is telling everyone, openly, how to bring the USA to a screeching halt in hard times. Simply have Congress vote no to increasing the statutory limit on public debt. No conspiracy, no civil war, no revolution. Just have Congress put the brakes to increasing the statutory limit on public debt. This next clip is from Joe Brown of Heresy Financial talking about a sovereign debt crisis.
If you're anything like me, you can see the writing on the wall. It's clear that the government is in between a rock and a hard place. Between the government's debt at over $32 trillion, their spending, which is currently at $5.3 trillion this year alone, which is up 10% from last year. The declining revenues, which are down 10% this year, only at $3.6 trillion, nowhere near enough to fund the spending, resulting in growing deficits this year up 122%. And on top of that, interest rates on government borrowing getting ready to skyrocket to levels it hasn't seen in decades. It's clear the government is set up for a sovereign debt crisis. It's also clear that the only way the government avoids default for the long term is to fire up the money printer again. And once the public catches on to this, it's clear that all the wealth will flow into assets or into places that will protect them from this currency debasement.
There is that one check that has to be accounted for before the money printer is fired up, the statutory limit on public debt. This next clip is Charlie Daniels opining in a Aaron Lewis song about country boys.
I love my country. I love my guns. I love my family. I love the way it is now. And anybody that tries to change it has to come through me. That should be all of our attitude.
Charlie Daniels, God rest his soul, saying, "If anything is going to change, you're going to have to come through me. And a country boy is good enough for me, son." Raising the debt limit is changing things, especially going from 14 trillion to 34 trillion in 14 years. That is financing a lot of change in the USA. The definition of a country boy is what exactly? Someone who will live and fight and die for the country, be they socialist, communist, tribal, or other opposing philosophy, left-wing or right-wing, anarchist or complete status. What is a country boy? Someone who is rooted in husbandry and agriculture? What about Hank Williams Jr.'s friend from the city in A Country Boy Can Survive? Was he a country boy? Bad accounting is disrespectful to allegiance. Bad accounting is like saying each and every one of us allegiance is not worth counting properly. This next clip is from the new movie Civil War and shows some discernment and conversation is prudent beyond giving blanket coverage for inclusion. I say this with an eye to the future because there are some Americans who will accept the statutory limit on public debt being done away with and letting the U.S. Treasury and the Executive Department with its alphabet soup agencies fund whatever it wants. I am inclined to think that is anathema to the ideas of checks and balances, and the big T word has to be applied.
YouGov reports that 43% estimate internal conflict is anywhere from somewhat likely to certain in the coming decade. Over half of self-described strong Republicans and 40% of strong Democrats say it's on the cards. So, with the recent movie Civil War still in theaters, now seems like a good time to dive into this, to ask what a sequel to America's deadliest conflict would really look like.
Well, you're American, okay? Okay. What kind of American are you?
Okay, what kind of American are you? Okay, what kind of a country boy are you? This next clip is from an episode from Joe Rogan questioning why this unstable, corrupt, stupid game is taken as normal or anywhere close to the best we can do.
It's over. As long as you can keep people at each other's throats, then you can continue to manipulate them. Then it's an easy chess game. And we get caught up in these ideological battles, and all the while they're inching us closer to nuclear war, pushing dangerous pharmaceutical drugs into our lives, and establishing narratives that are not based on fact at all. Next thing you know, we have something that's very similar to what's going on in China. We're not that far away from something like that happening here. All it would take is a large disaster, some sort of an attack, some sort of a terrible scenario where a bunch of people died and they had to change the rules in order to protect us. And next thing you know, you're fucked. As soon as people come together and they realize, like, hey, we have way more in common than we do difference. What do we really want? Everyone wants a safe neighborhood. You want good education. You want healthy food. You want people to be able to pursue their dreams. You want people to have a good time, and the more people you're around that have a good time, the better the quality of your life is going to be as well. The better the quality of life in your entire neighborhood. And if you have this mentality of great fortune and not a famine mentality, not have this mentality that all the success has to come to me and all these other people can go fuck themselves. If instead you go, wouldn't it be better if we all just did our best to work together as a community and just accept people for their differences and recognize that most of these differences are kind of bullshit. I don't give a fuck what music you like, what movies you enjoy, or how you like to dress. I don't care. If you think about your own life and your own pursuit of happiness and your own interests and concentrate on that more than you do stopping people from behaving in a way that you're ideologically opposed to, and that ideology, you're probably being manipulated in some way, shape, or form. It's so obvious to see how it's being set up, and the only way we're going to get out of this is if we, the collective, all of us, recognize this stupid game that people are playing.
What the U.S. Treasury Secretary is doing by sending these letters to Congress asking them to increase the statutory limit on public debt while remaining constitutional is also engaged in a stupid game. For instance, why doesn't Congress just increase the debt limit to $40 trillion instead of dragging the U.S. Treasury Secretary of the Treasury through the mud? This next clip comes from Dinesh D'Souza's show.
What they want to overthrow is the American system overall, the Western system. But we could say capitalism. At the end of the day, they're going to go after capitalism, which of course has made them very comfortable and affluent. Well, it made their parents that way. And these are very affluent people, young people. But let's remember that it's their parents who earn this money in the overwhelming majority of the cases.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary is making it very clear to anyone who wants to overthrow the United States and the supposed capitalism it uses. Simply have Congress vote no to increasing the statutory limit on public debt, and everything will come to a screeching halt domestically and globally. The affluence that they are currently living with, they will come to realize, is not based on a stable system. Will they blame capitalism for the hard times? Yes, they probably will. But that will be a false blame and witness. If Congress saying no to increasing the statutory limit on public debt brings down the U.S. economy, that is not taking down capitalism. That is taking down a decrepit situation. This next clip is from Glenn Beck, spotlighting another group supposedly trying to bring down the USA.
This is why all of this always moves in concert with a national election. Have you ever noticed the last, 8, 12 years, every major protest movement we have seems to kind of magically have this 4-year hibernation cycle. What a coincidence. I don't want to believe this about my country, but I believe it is true, and I believe it is coming. I believe we all need to pray for our republic and be very aware. I first saw signs that we were in a color revolution back in 2020, a group called Fight Back Table. It teamed up with a few other organizations to form something called the Transition Integrity Project. Well, we looked into it. It didn't seem like they were really doing a peaceful transition thing. They produced this document, which was the findings of the election night war game that analyzed what would happen if Donald Trump were to beat Biden. This thing is nuts. Again, it's at gb.com, glennbeck.com. Make sure you look at it, read it, please. It involved everything from unleashing waves of demonstrators on American streets to actually using the threat of secession to force concessions from Donald Trump. One source told the Daily Beast Fight Back Table's mission and what it was all about: occupy stuff, hold space, and shut things down, not just on election day, but for weeks.
If these socialists were serious about taking down the USA, they would listen to the U.S. Treasury Secretary and devote their efforts to having Congress vote no to increasing the statutory limit on public debt. This next part is supposedly a mural in the Gaza Strip. This is supposedly a mural in Gaza in 2024. Down with the USA. The U.S. Treasury Secretary is telling Congress if they don't increase the debt limit, the USA will go down. So, if Congress ever says no to increasing the debt limit, they will be helping Hamas bring down the USA. It is a fine pickle that any attempt to slow down or stop the national debt will in effect help the enemies of the USA. This next clip is from Eli Crane on the Sean Ryan Show.
I also think that there are people within this country that are literally trying to destroy this country so they can remake it into whatever, this utopia that they think that they can socially engineer.
It is a peculiar situation because there are socialists trying to socially engineer their way to utopia, and there are plunderers only in it for what they can get in the moment. But pushing all that aside, the quickest, easiest way to bring down the USA is to do what the U.S. Treasury Secretary is warning us not to do. Have Congress vote no to increasing the statutory limit on public debt. This next clip is from Kim Iverson spotlighting the USA funding Israel.
There's many other wars right now that are worse than what's going on in Gaza, but people only want to complain because Jews are doing it. No, that is not true. The reason why we're not complaining about the various wars that are happening in maybe Africa or other parts of the world is because we're not funding them. Our issue is we are funding, and we've got a government that just seems to kowtow to Israel as if it is their country rather than the United States. That's the issue. We don't need to be raising our, raising up for protests about wars we don't even fund. What are you protesting then? Who are you protesting? The reason why people are speaking out is because they're protesting the United States government who's funding this war in particular, and some other wars. That is why we protest those particular wars, not because, we're just racist anti-Semites against Jews and we just say something because of Jews. No, it's because we're funding these Jews in their particular war. We're not funding some, some other like Islamist group somewhere else in the world that's committing a crime against some other, we're just not. We're not funding that.
Does the USA really need to be involved in all these foreign places? I do not wish Israel any ill will, and I think they have a right to respond to the October 7th attacks with the full might of war, because the attack from Gaza was an act of war. But I don't believe the USA should be propping up Israel. And from some things I have heard, the USA is also giving funds to Gaza. That is nonsense. If we can't pick a side, it is immoral to give them both money as they kill each other. The whole theme of this series of videos is about a method to stop the USA from treating the full faith and credit of the USA disrespectfully, to give everything to everyone all around the world. The following clip is from Lao Y86 on China.
China's economy is so bad that they're banning rich people now. Tons of rich people are getting banned, censored, and erased by the Chinese government. They've enacted a campaign to go after people who create a wealth-flaunting persona. But this doesn't just stop at bans online, though. There are legal and political implications, too.
China has benefited a lot by having the USA's marketplace open up to them since the 1970s. A lot of their wealth has been created as the USA's public debt increased from $1 trillion to $4 trillion and on up to the current $34 trillion. So now China is banning wealthy people. It is important to understand that had the U.S. maintained a respectable $1 trillion as the statutory limit on public debt, all trade with China would have been slower and more stable. There would be less grossly wealthy rich people in China to ban now. This next clip comes from China Uncensored.
It's in the CCP's ideological blood to want domination and control, not just domestically, but on the international stage.
This is probably an example of multiple things going on at the same time. Yes, China probably does want to be powerful, very powerful, and the Chinese as a culture have a deep history in trade. So they have to balance their desire to dominate with actions that support the current trade policies with the USA. If China truly wanted to dominate the USA, they would listen to the warnings coming from the U.S. Treasury Secretary and do everything they could behind the scenes to have the U.S. Congress vote no to increasing the statutory limit on public debt, because that apparently would bring down the USA's economy to a screeching halt. This next clip is from Andrew Klavan talking about right wing and left wing.
And it actually is the first thing I wanted to ask you was, like, why is it that left-wing bad is invisible when right-wing bad is so immediately identifiable? So if right-wing does something really bad, and they do, the far right is awful, but we can see it. We say, oh yeah, that's bad. But when the left just destroys things, everything in their wake, it's okay to wear a Che Guevara T-shirt. I mean, the guy was a murderer, but that's fine. It's okay to wear a hammer sickle and all this. Why? What is the difference?
To fairly have this in context, Mr. Klavan is talking about large-scale sweeping applications of left-wing communism and right-wing fascism. More to the point, since he is talking to Bill Whittle about his new show, What We Saw, An Empire of Terror, about the USSR. Concerning micro applications, if the abuse of increasing the statutory limit on public debt is a real problem, then the Democrats left wing and the Republicans right wing are both plundering the USA's credit. When you are being abused, it is a twisted situation when you have to choose which wing you support doing the abusing. This next clip comes from the Daily Wire.
And I think the conservative movement in America is moving more in this direction. It's much more in the classical direction, which is, hey, we want to conserve stuff. And that means conserving traditions, conserving ways of life, conserving institutions, conserving buildings, conserving borders, conserving laws, and yes, conserving money.
At this point, is there really anything more ludicrous as someone saying they are conservative about money in the USA? If we were conservative, we would have a statutory limit on public debt of no more than $1 trillion. Tongue in cheek at that. As a reality check, if we want to hold the line as conservatives, we would not support Congress increasing the statutory limit on public debt at all. And the Treasury Secretaries over the past 15 years are telling everyone life will get real hard real fast if that limit is not increased every time it is hit. Therefore, to apply conservative principles means we have to potentially make life hard in the USA. That does not sound smart. And one of the salient features of choosing to be a conservative is that it is smart. This next clip is from the estimable Russell Brand.
Hang on a minute, the pharmaceutical industry and the state are operating in conjunction with these unelected bureaucratic bodies in order to centralize authority and generate profit. Is that what it was?
At the tail end of this clip, the phrase "to generate profit" is used. Mr. Brand does, as a recurring theme, and rightly so in my opinion, criticize corporations being propped up by the state in positions where they can generate profit. My point is to help us talk like adults so we can correctly gauge and understand the current situation and make informed choices without sounding like gibbering idiots. Can a profit be generated by charging a markup paid with Federal Reserve notes, which are defined as obligations in the U.S. Code, and whose reason for existing are the Treasury bonds given sold to the Federal Reserve. With behind the scenes, the U.S. Treasury Secretary is continually soft-begging and soft-threatening Congress to increase the statutory limit on public debt so they can sell more Treasury bonds to the Federal Reserve. And does this influx seem like a profit to the U.S. Treasury? Trying to pinpoint the situation, this is not fascism entirely. It is not capitalism entirely. It is not entirely social plunder as defined by Bastiat, though I am comfortable with making that accusation. But we do need to find a way to talk accurately about the truth. Defining a profit as some marked up Federal Reserve notes is disgusting, since a profit is supposed to be an asset, not a liability obligation under the state's ownership. The next clip is a short reminder from Buster Scruggs.
You need a count? No, sir. Well, that ain't good.
As a general rule, when someone asks if you want a count, probably should get a count. In the USA, we probably need a count to get the numbers back on track. The government does not have any business with people's lives if they can't keep the numbers correct. That should be a minimum requirement. If the government can fudge the numbers, they will eventually think they can fudge people's lives, which usually occurs when the plunder can no longer be hidden. There is only one reason why the numbers would be wrong, because they are not right. Now comes a smart observation from John Wayne.
You're being conned into Keynesianism and socialism now. But it isn't going to stop the selfishness of human behavior. It isn't going to stop the greed. If you take $20 and give $1 to every son of a bitch in a room, and come back a year later, one of the bastards will have most of the money.
This observation is one of the fundamental concerns of any relation between wealth and power. This observation is right in the thick of understanding capitalism and concerns of socialism. It is fair game for someone to be good at acquiring wealth, but the concerns are when they keep that wealth out of circulation or buy power from the state to run the government as they want. There is a fascinating thing going on concerning the statutory limit on public debt. The great influx of Federal Reserve notes facilitated by the debt limit being increased from $14 trillion in 2014 to $34 trillion in 2024 has made those good at acquiring money very busy acquiring more and more. Meanwhile, those 90% of the population who are not good at acquiring money are not really hurting due to a lack of circulation of money, since more just keeps getting pumped in. Now, those in power are most likely getting petitioned by the rich to jockey government power in their favor. There is some salve in knowing that both the capitalists and socialists have their own lobbyists to keep the fight in flux. So what is the problem then? Without getting into hypocritical semantic assessment of the overall morality and values of society, let's just say this is a problem that needs to be addressed for a stable society. There are ideas how to do this. In fact, part of communist doctrine is against such accumulation of private wealth by a select few. But this is a problem, and not just a problem that can be solved by communism. Therefore, communism is not the only possible answer or cure. Continually increasing the statutory limit on public debt is not solving this problem either. It is just overriding it by the slew of Federal Reserve notes being pumped in. In the end, this age-old problem will raise itself again and will manifests itself as warlords and aristocrats who are able to combine wealth with power. This next clip is from Russell Brand.
It's interesting because when you speak to people that have perhaps previously made an income in criminal ways, organised crime, you have a version of that in North America, you have versions of that around the world. And in Britain, the sort of post-1960s style gangster culture has an incredible glamour to it. And in part, what you always feel is this, aside from the, violence and the criminality, it's difficult to avoid the conclusion that really these are people that have bypassed systems that are supposed to repress and control them. There are just criminal enterprises that are taking place on a much larger scale that kind of legislate in their wake to mask the criminal nature, creating whatever institutions or global entity is required to frame, badge, and provide sigils and insignia that legitimize, well, we did this for the Queen of England.
Indeed, the sycophantic increasing of the statutory limit of the public debt by the U.S. Congress is being done for a lot of dishonorable things, some brutal and some with altruistic intentions but making people dependent. Here is a quote from Thomas Paine's Common Sense. "But Britain is the parent country, some say. Then the more shame upon her conduct. Even brutes do not devour their young, nor savages make war upon their families. Wherefore the assertion, if true, turns to her reproach, but it happens not to be true, or only partly so, and the phrase parent or mother country hath been Jesuitically adopted by the king and his parasites, with a low papistical design of gaining a unfair bias on the credulous weakness of our minds. Europe, and not England, is the parent country of America. This new world hath been the asylum for the persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe. Hither have they fled, not from the tender embraces of the mother, but from the cruelty of the monster. And it is so far true of England, that the same tyranny which drove the first immigrants from home pursues their descendants still." Commentary. The great monster of bad, unaccountable government is alive and thriving, and preying on the credulous weakness of our minds in 2024. And another clip from Russell Brand about Joe Biden.
Let's just try once more.
She knows so long as she was denied, our freedom can never be secured. She knows so long as she was denied, our freedom can never be secured.
She's not lost. She can't be denied. Our freedom will never be secured. Yeah, it's abstract. It's at best abstract, but...
Two of the coherent words President Biden did get out were freedom and security. Concerning the definition of those words, what are we to think of the Secretary of the Treasury soft-begging Congress to increase the statutory limit of public debt? This next clip makes me sad because I am a military dependent, spending my early years on U.S. military bases overseas. I know I am a proud and propagandized American, and would not have it any other way.
She's my dog, sir, and she's hurt. I'm taking her to the vet.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you that Chuck's right. We have to take your dog into the shelter.
But to do so, you've got to go through the 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine Division, United States Marine Corps.
82nd Airborne Division, U.S. Army.
6th Fleet, United States Navy.
Screaming Eagles.
4th Infantry Division, United States Army.
You really want this thing to escalate?
Do you?
So, it is interesting that in all the PDF letters from the Treasury Secretary to Congress that the U.S. military nor military-industrial complex makes a demonstrable appearance. Only the phrases national security interests and salaries of military personnel and their families occur. I can sense the pride of all these people in having served in the U.S. military, and it should be common knowledge that financing this costs a lot. Then there is the question of should we be doing some things and should we not be doing some things. For instance, having pride in being an American, but then acquiring the information in this series of videos. What do you think about the future? This next clip is a stretch. I wanted it included for exactly that reason. All the outlandish things we hear about secret government-backed capabilities. This is one for sure.
Okay, you ready for some orb videos? Okay, let's do it.
I like this story, but I'm saying so, and we're going with the narrative. No, I'm not even trying to rush you. I'm just saying we know it has pings, so we think that they fake those pings so they can create a narrative that it is in the South Indian Ocean. But what happened? What do you think happened?
Yeah, so I think that what we see in these videos is what happened. As hard as it is to believe here, I think the United States government has gravity and space-time manipulation technology. Like literally, not just anti-gravity, which is if you talk to these UFO people, who I'm not a big fan of in general, they'd be like, yeah, we've got anti-gravity technology, which you see this first orb kind of doing around this plane. Mm-hmm. But we're going to see this plane just straight up disappear. And this is where it comes into this complete space-time manipulation technology. Now, we're watching these orbs spin around the plane, but they're moving around with purpose here. They've got this triangle formation, perfect equilateral triangle. They're doing something, you can tell when they're spinning around. It appears to be mapping the plane. Now, we've been able to figure out this. Seems like they're trying to map the plane to figure out exactly how big the singularity needs to be. And then they shift to this vertical orientation. And this is right before the zap.
One of the most important questions is, why does the USA have to be $34 trillion in debt? Especially since in 2014 we were only $14 trillion in debt. In assessing what it is seen and unseen and things like this outlandish capability purported, how much does stuff like that cost? And aircraft carriers, submarines, tanks, airplanes, and such. There is a saying, if you can see it, it is already 20 years outdated. So, if we are seeing something purported like in this video, and it is 20 years outdated, there is a partial explanation why so much money is needed in circulation. It also probably means that honest people who want true accountability are out of their league, way out of their league, and any reasonable expectation to decide their destiny has been cast in with people engaging in science that is really so powerful as to be evolutionary in scope. This next video comes from Heavy Duty Country.
So what is the risk here? Oh, I forgot. You guys want people exposed for when y'all do ATF raids and just do no-knock warrants and murder airport executives, right? That's what you want. Moving on. So here's the ironic part of this. Subsection A, which is the ban of civilian body armor. Civilian is the key word here. Shall not apply to a purchase, ownership, or possession by or under the authority of the United States or any department or agency of the United States, a state or department agency or political subdivision of a state, or a covered law enforcement officer. So, to summarize this, you want civilians completely exposed, but if you're law enforcement or part of the government, you can do whatever you want. Give me another definition of tyranny, and then I'll read what I read to you again.
Have Congress vote no to increasing the statutory limit on public debt, and watch the alphabet soup agencies wither up. Makes me have a warm, fuzzy feeling. I have to say thank you to the Treasury Secretaries for writing these letters to Congress and letting we the people know what is going on. So there it is. Yes, I did cherry pick these videos and weave them into context of this series of videos. In my defense, each and every one of these videos I downloaded from YouTube via Real Player and watched them in the evenings. They are all part of topics I find interesting. I did not go out and specifically search for any of these videos. As I was listening to them, having a glass of Merlot, and working on this series of videos on the debt limit, I thought about the topic on hand and its impact at society at large, and then, where applicable, harvested the clips for inclusion in this analysis. Hope you found it interesting.